Jean-Jean Rouse, born in Geneva in 1712, was one of the 18th century's most important political thinkers. His work focused on the relationship between human society and the individual, and contributed to the ideas that would lead eventually to the French Revolution.
His early work argued that the development of civilization had actually led to decrease in happiness, and that humans should live instead in a state that was as close to nature as possible. The social contract, which its famous opening sentence, "Man is born free and he is everywhere in chains," stated instead that people could only experience true freedom if they live in a civil society that ensured the rights and well-being of its citizens. Being part of such a society involved submitting to the general will, a force that transcended individuals and aimed to uphold the common good.
Rousseau's theory of sovereignty and law had a direct influence on French revolutionaries, such as Robespierre, and were blamed for some of the worst excesses of the terror in France. Nevertheless, the social contract has also been seen as one of the defining texts of modern political philosophy, emphasizing the need for individuals to play a responsible part in civil society if they want their liberty to be assured.
Social contract theory. According to social contract theory, people live together in society in accordance with an agreement that establishes moral and political ground rules. Some people believe that if we follow a social contract, we can live morally by choice rather than because a divine being requires it. Philosophers dating back to Socrates have attempted to describe the ideal social contract and explain how existing social contracts have evolved over time. According to philosopher Stuart Rachels, morality is the set of rules governing behavior that rational people accept on the condition that others accept them as well. Laws are an example of an explicit social contract, whereas raising one's hand in class to speak is an example of an implicit social contract. The United States Constitution is frequently cited as an explicit example of a component of America's social contract. It specifies what the government may and may not do. People who choose to live in America agree to be bound by the moral and political obligations outlined in the social contract of the Constitution.
In his 1755 discourse on the origin of inequality, Rawls argued that in nature, humans were solitary but also healthy, happy, good, and free. When humans began to live together as families and neighbors, what Rawls called nascent societies were formed. However, this development gave rise to negative and destructive passions such as jealousy and pride, which in turn fostered social inequalities and human vice. The introduction of private properties marked a further step towards inequality, as it necessitated the use of law and government to protect it. Rawls bemoaned the fatal concept of property and the horrors that followed the departure from a state in which the earth belonged to no one.
As Rawls described it in the discourse, civil society arose to serve two purposes: to provide peace for all and to ensure the right to property for those fortunate enough to own property. It thus benefited everyone, but primarily the rich, because it converted their de facto ownership into rightful ownership, while keeping the poor dispossessed. It was, indeed, a somewhat deceptive social contract, because the poor receive far less than the rich. But Rawls also believed in the possibility of a genuine social contract in which people would receive a better kind of freedom in exchange for their independence, namely through political or republican liberty. Such liberty, according to Rawls' description in 1762, the social contract can be found in obedience to what he called the volonté générale or general will, a collectively held will that seeks the common good or the common interest.
Rousseau's view of citizenship was far more organic and less individualistic than Locke's. The exchange of independence for political liberty meant that all individual rights, including property rights, were subordinate to the general will. The state, according to Rousseau, is a moral person whose life is the union of its members, whose laws are acts of general will, and whose end goal is the liberty and equality of its citizens. As a result, when any government usurps the power of the people, the social contract is broken, and citizens are no longer obligated to obey, but they are also obligated to rebel. The social contract aided in the inspiration of political reforms or revolutions in Europe, particularly in France. The social contract argued that monarchs didn't have divine authority to legislate. According to Rousseau, only the sovereign people have that all-powerful right.
What is general will? In political theory, general will is a collectively held will that seeks the common good or common interest. The general will is central to Jean-John Rawls' political philosophy and an important concept in modern Republican thought. Rawls distinguished between the general will and the specific, often contradictory, wills of individuals and groups. Rawls argued in the social contract that freedom and authority are not mutually exclusive because legitimate laws are founded on the general will of the citizens. The individual citizen is thus only obeying himself as a member of the political community by obeying the law. The concept of general will predates Rawls and has its origins in Christian theology.
When can true freedom be attained? The social contract's driving force is the problem of freedom. People have physical freedom in the state of nature, which means that their actions are not restrained in any way, but they are little more than animals, slaves to their own instincts and impulses. People in most modern societies, however, lack even this physical freedom. They are obligated to obey an absolutist king or government that is not in any way accountable to them. Rawls hopes to secure the civil freedom that should accompany life in society by proposing a social contract. This liberty is tempered by a pledge not to harm one's fellow citizens, but this constraint motivates people to be moral and rational. Civil freedom is superior to physical freedom in this sense because people are not even slaves to their impulses.
What is the veil of ignorance? Well, according to philosopher John Rawls, we should imagine ourselves as sitting behind a veil of ignorance that prevents us from knowing who we are and identifying with our personal circumstances. We can consider how societies should operate more objectively if we are unaware of our circumstances. The liberty principle and the difference principle are two primary principles that supplement Rawls' veil of ignorance. According to the liberty principle, the social contract should strive to ensure that everyone has the greatest amount of liberty possible while not interfering with the freedom of others. The social contract, according to the difference principle, should ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity to prosper. In other words, if there are any social or economic differences in the social contract, they should assist those who are most disadvantaged. Furthermore, any contract benefits should be available to everyone. So, approaching difficult issues through a veil of ignorance and applying this principle